Field of 68.
Welcome back to the Champagne on Ice podcast presented by the Field of 68. College basketball is officially here, fellas. By the time this podcast is going live, it is going to be Illini game day, regular season game day against Eastern Illinois. I'm Kyle Tausk, joined, as always, my co-host Mike Farmer. Mike, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you, Kyle?
I'm doing great. I'm fired up to talk some hoops. And with the season about to get underway, I thought it'd be the perfect time to bring our first guest here on the show, a guy that I work with daily on the radio. I have to hear his voice every day on his radio show here in Champaign. Also the lead basketball reporter for 24/7 Sports' Illini Inquirer, Derek Piper. Pipes, how are you, man? Thanks for jumping on with us.
I'm doing great, Kyle and Mike. I appreciate you having me on. Kyle, I figured you'd be tired of hearing my voice. You wouldn't want to hear from me, but I'm excited to do this. Definitely going to accept the invite to be the first guest, and let's dive in on this thing.
Well, we really appreciate it. Let's just talk some Illini hoops here. I'm curious. Let's start with preseason play. We've seen this team on the court twice in exhibition play. First game against an NAIA opponent in Ottawa, but the big one was last week. Number 1 Kansas comes to town for the Maui Strong Relief Charity Exhibition game. The Illini beat them, and we get our first look at this group against a high-level opponent. What were some of your biggest takeaways? What did you notice? What were your first impressions seeing this group take the court twice in exhibition play? And how encouraging was that game last Sunday? I know obviously a game that doesn't count, but number 1 comes in and you knock them off.
Yeah, I think it was very encouraging because I don't think there was any question about both teams' desire to win. You look at Kansas and Illinois both in terms of their rotations, really locking in on giving their starters and their main players in their rotations, if it counted, the bulk of the minutes. So that was a legit look at Illinois against a high caliber opponent, and they looked the part. I mean, they were in control of that game for most of it. You look at the fact they led 36 of the 40 minutes. I think in terms of like going in on certain aspects of it, like Terrence Shannon Jr., I know a big talking point throughout the offseason is he going to be assertive and be someone that game in and game out looks like a star, like a guy that can obviously was a first team all Big Ten guy last year. We know that his ceiling is a little bit higher than that in terms of he could be an All-American. He could be a guy that maybe even dips into the first round if his game becomes more consistent, if he shoots the three more consistently, which he did in that game. He hits 5 threes. He was in takeover mode. Great battle between him and Kevin McCullough. McCullough's going to be someone, in the mix for all Big 12 first teamer and maybe even outside chance in All-American honors for him as well. So I thought the way that Terrence really set the tone of being able to be a guy that said, hey, we're ride my shoulders to this win, really. But obviously it wasn't all him. I mean, Coleman stepped up and hitting 4 threes. And I think that's so important for this offense because I really like what Brad's done in terms of the spacing and playing Coleman at the 5, his ability to play pick and pop, his ability to be a playmaker in the high post and out to the top of the key, and really against a big-time big man in Hunter Dickinson. We know you're going to see some of those across the league and like a Zach Edey and whatnot. Coleman can make that matchup a bonus for him on the offensive end when he's able to space it out and shoot it like that. So we'll see. Both those guys have been streaky shooters through their careers. So we'll see what that looks like over a full sample size of a season. But that was encouraging. Both your star players really answered the call there. And then just different guys chipping in, especially down the stretch. I mean, Quincy Guerrier, 24 years old and physical and strong, and his ability to attack off the dribble and get into the lane and get fouled, that was something that I didn't really expect him to do a ton of. I mean, I knew he was a good rebounder, good catch and shoot guy from what he showed at Oregon. So his ability to do that, kind of be able to drive aggressive closeouts and get into the lane and get fouled. And Justin Harmon, just someone that wants to win, somebody that just wants to. I think Marcus Mask is the same way, and kind of bigger picture. I just like how the transfers fit because I feel like those guys are older guys that have experience, but they're so far from what we can tell, they seem like to be pretty selfless players, team guys, and Harmon's cut down the lane that Coleman hits him for was a huge play. So I like the rebounding. I like the veteran presence really showing out, especially in crunch time. And I think across the board, there's a lot of different things you can break down about it. I mean, it wasn't a perfect showing by any means, and things that Illinois is going to have to build off of. But like you said, I mean, beating number one, you can maybe question, does Kansas look like number one in terms of what they showed? But that is a legit top 10 team. Bill Self, very well coached and well respected. And Illinois to show out like they did in that game was a great start going into the ones that count.
I want to. You mentioned the transfers there. I know those are the guys that we're unfamiliar with. It was good to see those guys on the court for the first time. But I want to kind of start and focus on. You mentioned the two stars. They played like stars. I feel like when talking about this team this year, I feel like Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins are almost getting lost in everything. Like you get those two guys back from the NBA, but the focus has been on point guard, the transfers. How are they going to fit in the freshmen? But really, to me, the key is that Shannon and Hawkins play like they did against Kansas. I'm curious how good Terrence Shannon specifically. Let's start with him because that is a big time. That's an NBA prospect. That's a guy. That's a big time returnee for you. How good do you think he needs to be for this team to reach their ultimate ceiling? What can he get better at from last year? How can he be more consistent? And how good do you think he needs to? What level do you think he needs to reach for this team to be their top capability?
Yeah, no, I think he definitely needs to be a no-brainer in terms of a first team All Big Ten guy. I think that if Illinois is going to have the season that it really hopes to, which is winning the Big Ten title, which I think that maybe now we're taking them a little bit more seriously in that. I'd say nationally, people probably raise their eyebrows a little bit, seeing that result against Kansas and knowing that Purdue is a really good team. They had a great battle against Arkansas. They almost ended up falling short in their charity exhibition game. Michigan State, another team that in that top 10, top 5 range nationally. They fall to Tennessee, but those are really good teams. Maybe Illinois, at least as of right now, looks somewhat on par with those teams. I think for Illinois to make that run at winning a Big Ten title, it's got to be Terrence to be the unquestioned top guy. And if Illinois wins it, maybe he's in consideration. I know it's pretty easy thinking about the stat line that Zach E's probably going to put up to just pencil him in and say he's going to be the Big Ten Player of the Year. But maybe Terrence makes a run at that. I just think within his game, I know there's been a lot of talk, and rightfully so, about being able to be more consistent with his right hand. Because as you know, I mean, throughout the offseason, a lot of the question is ball handling, playmaking. What's that going to look like? And I think that right now, it's a team that's relying on a number of different guys to facilitate offense, and Terrence's ability to use both hands and get downhill is going to be important. I think that his mid-range game, which has been talked about a lot, and we'll see how that progresses throughout the season. I know he's put a lot of work in that, and I think that if he can see the soft spots in the defense of getting into that mid-range level and hitting that jump shot at a decent rate, that could really help him because teams are going to, as they did last year, try to wall up at the rim, anticipate his drives. But he's not going to shoot for three, go up in the paint and try to make things as tough as possible for him. So if he's able to get inside that lane, maybe pump fake a three and settle for that 15 to 18-foot jump shot. Obviously, Io made a living there. I'm not saying he's going to be Io by any means, but and then I think it's just kind of a mindset for Terrence. I think it's an every night make sure that my team is being able to follow my lead because there's some times last year where he kind of took a back seat, early in first halves and maybe Illinois was on the wrong side of a run. And there were just stretches where Terrence was electric, but there were also stretches where he was a little bit too passive and non-existent. So just kind of that mentality of I got to be having my A game most nights, and I got to be assertive because like his ability to get the free throw line is just should be easy points for Illinois. So I think that's something that even just when the three ball is not falling, just his ability to go downhill and attack, obviously that will open things up for other guys too. So, um, I think that he has the ability to jump into the late first round if he plays his best. And for Illinois to go where they want to go, I mean, like I said, he has to be a legit star and a guy that's an A-lister in the Big Ten, and maybe a guy that's making a run at All-American too.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Terrence. He's pretty much the clear number one option on offense. He's a leader in the locker room. But Illinois has another guy, another potential NBA talent in Coleman Hawkins this year. He declared for the draft last year, came back, didn't get the feedback he necessarily wanted. We went over our Big Ten team predictions in our last episode. We both had Terrence first team, obviously. And then I think we both had Coleman Hawkins on the third team, making an appearance on an all Big Ten team this year. So what do you see Coleman doing this year in terms of what he's improving for the NBA and what he's improving on in terms of maybe consistency on offense, leadership in the locker room, stuff like that?
Yeah, you said it there with consistency. I mean, it's similar to what Terrence has on his plate. Is just to be more of a consistent factor, playing at a higher level on a night to night basis. And for Coleman, yeah, I think the 3-point shooting is really, really important. We'll find out if that's going to be something that he's able to rise to a level of consistency. He's a guy that has not shot, really above 30%, 31% from three in any given season. Can he get to 35? That would be a huge shot in the arm for this offense. And even if it is a situation where he's a little bit up and down with the jump shot, I think it's shot selection offensively. I think it's being able to make good decisions with the ball in his hands, because I know Brad has said it and maybe would even say it today, like, hey, we don't want Coleman to have the same type of load on his shoulders in terms of playmaking and just having to create so much. But from what I've seen, I mean, Illinois played a ton through him, like having the ball in his hands a lot in the high post, as a guy that's coming off of handoff actions, pick and pop actions. And one thing I really do like is that this year it seems like Marcus Damask obviously has shown it with his movement off the ball, and Justin Harmon that cut. Like, I just think Illinois is going to move better within a flow of an offense, and just kind of cutting into open spaces. So him being able to see that, him being able to hit guys with timing, and I do think he's going to be someone that can have a decent assist total as a big man. Make that matchup tough for five men to come out and guard him. I think that's going to be Illinois' best option or best avenue to be able to challenge teams in terms of what they bring offensively. Defensively, you know what Coleman's going to be able to do. He's going to be able to guard just about any position, being able to switch out onto the perimeter if they need to do that, being able to utilize his length and his mobility to challenge passing lanes, and just be a very active and heady defender. That's something that he obviously can do. So how that looks, maybe guarding some fives if he's going to, because it seems like Illinois' primary lineup is him at the five. So him against some bigger centers that are going to try to bully him. How does he handle that? I think that's going to be interesting. Of course, Illinois can send help and try to double team the post and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's just Coleman being able to cut down on some mistakes, cut down on some of those bad turnovers from last year, cut down on some of those questionable shots that he took, and just try to. Brad's talked about simplifying the game for Coleman, so I think that's important for him to offensively, and just to be able to set the table and play like a veteran, and play like a guy that you can rely on in some big spots. And I think that's what you're looking for out of him.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that has stood out to me early is you mentioned it. The talk was that, hey, maybe we need to take some of the playmaking load off of Coleman this year, and it really hasn't looked that way at all through two exhibition games. They're running a lot through him, and I think that kind of leads in a perfect transition into one of the biggest question marks on this team, which has been talked about all offseason long, point guard. And we've seen Ty Rodgers get the start there in 2 games. Feels like he hasn't had a ton of opportunities to do a whole lot with the ball in his hand so far. I'm curious to see how much we'll see that as we work into the regular season here. But do you think this is a team that's kind of going to have a point guard by committee per se, or run an offense through a lot of different guys? We've seen Coleman do it a lot. We've seen them run stuff through their wings like Marcus Damask, Terrence Shannon. Do you think that's maybe more of what we'll see this year? Do you think Ty Rodgers will factor in more? And then late in games, we've seen Ty Rodgers off the court late in that Kansas game with the free throw concerns. Do you think, obviously it went well against Kansas, you had 5 veterans out there, you closed the game out. Are you concerned that that's not something that's going to be very sustainable? Ty Rodgers may need to prove himself a little bit more. You may need to get a ball handler out there on the court. Do you think, how concerned are you about that? And just overall, are we putting a little too much into the point guard question?
I think Brad would tell us that we are, and he even spoke about that in the media leading up to the opener, is that, hey, primary ball handler is something that's being attached to Ty, but it might not honestly be his reality. He's a guy out there that can be a playmaker. He's going to guard point guards. Can he initiate offense? Yes. He's going to play in some ball screen action. I love the way that he attacked the rim early against Kansas, but I think it is a situation where they're trying to just play through different spots, and it's through I think for the most part through a flow of the offense, and it's really starting with Coleman at the top and being able to let him make decisions, and then you're allowing some other guys to play in some actions like Damask, who I think is a very high IQ player and versatile. Obviously, I mean, he can play with the ball in his hands, he can pass, he can be a spot up shooter. Terrence, trying to get him downhill. I mean, that's something obviously you're gonna try to do. So allowing him some opportunities to play in some ball screens. So as it stands right now, I think Illinois would prefer to go with the route of having just different guys that you put in those spots instead of just a kind of a prototypical point guard. Like, hey, we're going to put Ty Rodgers in a ball screen at the start of 95% of our possessions. I think that's how, admittedly, how I thought, and a lot of people have thought of what a point guard means. I just don't think that that's the reality for this team as it stands right now. Now, I think there are going to be situations, and I definitely noticed it against Kansas, and I think late game against the Jayhawks. Now, again, we're talking about a late October game that there's a lot to clean up for anybody that's playing a competitive basketball game right now. But there were some possessions that were clunky late. There were some times where it looked like Illinois didn't have a point guard out there on the floor. So I think Ty's development there is certainly important to be able to set the table for some guys. We know that when you get in crunch time or you got teams that are fighting and clawing, trying to get back into the game, they're going to amp up the pressure in terms of the on ball pressure, getting deep in the backcourt. And we've seen the Purdue game last year how Brandon Newman pressured Terrence Shannon. We know that can be an issue in terms of maybe him bringing up the ball. I know that Kyle, we've talked about on the radio. Maybe Coleman brings it up a little bit if he's playing the five. You take that chance of someone an opposing five man if he really wants to guard you full court. And of course, if you're going to play a traditional just full court trap, you maybe want to use your passing to be able to get through that. But I'm not, just because Illinois beat Kansas and has looked good offensively so far, I'm not sitting here and saying, hey, point guard won't be an issue, because I think it still can be in spots. But so far, I think the plan is to not put too much on Ty Rodgers' plate, and I agree with it. I think so far it looks like something they can withstand. But yes, the free throw shooting for Ty is the reason he wasn't out there against Kansas, and probably will be the reason that he's not out there, at least in terms of early on in those spots. Can that hurt Illinois? We'll see. We're going to find that out. Maybe Ty shows that his free throw shooting takes a leap from 38% above 50. Obviously, you'd like it 60 and plus for him to be out there, but I think it's still a reason to be very, very intrigued. And I think in particular, late in games without a true point guard is something that I'm going to be really interested to monitor going forward with this team. And I think it could be a downfall still, but early indications, I do like how they're using multiple guys to play make. And if there's just an ability for guys to see the floor well and move well and continue to have a flow within an offense, which they just didn't have last year, maybe you can make up for some of that in terms of not having that pure floor general.
So Derek, I'd like to get your thoughts on the rotations we've seen. So against Ottawa, obviously a lesser opponent, we beat them by however many, 50, 60, I don't remember. We saw pretty much the whole roster play, even the walk-ons got on the court. Every scholarship player scored, I believe. And then against Kansas, we saw the rotation. Most of the guys still got in the game, but it shortened towards the end of the game. You see the seniors, the veterans, transfers getting the minutes down the stretch. And you see some younger guys like the freshmen, Amani, DGL, Moretti, Sincere, even Luke and Dane kind of pushed to the bench. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what are the rotations going to look like early in the season against these bye games, and then as we progress to Marquette, Tennessee, FAU, and the Big Ten slate, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's one thing where, Brad talks about having exhibition games, charity exhibition games every, offseason going forward. I do think they like the value. If you're playing Kansas behind closed doors, you're probably playing Draven Gibbs-Lawhorn, Amani Hansberry 15, 20 minutes and getting the chance to see what that looks like. That's where, in Eastern Illinois, in Oakland, some of these other games in the non-conference, you want to be up with comfortable leads to get those guys those minutes and get that experience. I think this is I think it's a deep team, but obviously, like you're pointing to with Kansas, like that rotation definitely shrunk. And usually, coaches like to ride, especially early, with experience, guys they trust. And that's not to say that Dane Danger gets 10 minutes. That doesn't mean that Brad doesn't necessarily trust him. Luke Goody kind of in that same range, 9 to 10 minutes. I do think that the Illini trust him in terms of what he's going to do and to be in the right spots and everything. But there is quite a bit of internal competition for those minutes. And I do like the fact that you can kind of push some different buttons based on what you need. Like looking at the Kansas matchup, KJ Adams before, a really athletic and strong four-man. And I really liked, I thought going into the offseason that Quincy Guerrier was going to be the starting four-man. And in particular, I just like that matchup in that particular game is that Guerrier's got that physicality to him. I thought it was a good matchup for KJ. Maybe there's some other instances where you want to maximize more shooting and you put Luke out there for a little bit more minutes than maybe a Guerrier does, or maybe you're in a situation where you wish that there was more life or more defensive intensity, so you plug Sincere in there. You want to play on the fact that a team doesn't have a lot of rim protection or doesn't guard the post that well, so you play Dane more minutes at the 5 than you would in a different matchup. So I think that Brad has provided an opportunity to push different buttons with that. And I think that's exciting for him. Obviously, it's a challenge to make sure you have the right rotations and you're putting out the right groups at the right times. But yeah, I think that early indications are right now, in particular, I mean, we're talking a lot about point guard. Like when Ty Rodgers was off the floor against Kansas, Brad went a lot with Marcus Damas bringing the ball up. Justin Harmon had the ball in his hands a little bit as well versus Nico Moretti or Draven Gibbs-Lawhorn being that backup point guard. I think for the most part with Draven, they're still looking for him to learn the game a little bit more, settle into that role, see the floor, make good decisions. I think like a lot of freshmen, and you heard a lot about this, going into last season with Jaden Epps, is like, all right, things are fast for him right now. He's turning the ball over. Obviously, we saw Jaden had some really good stretches for Illinois last year. I think Draven will as well in terms of his scoring ability, and obviously he's a really good athlete too. Nico Moretti, defensively, I wonder about him. I wonder about how good he's going to be able to defend. I think that they like his feel for the game. They like that he can play in ball screens and be somebody that sees the floor well. But right now, I think that Brad will rely on his experience and those older guys, particularly early in the schedule. And maybe it'll take some time for Draven, for Nico, for Amani to kind of prove that they belong on the floor in some big spots. So I think it's great that you don't have to rely on young guys as much going into this year. Obviously, we'll see how different guys react when they don't play and don't get the minutes they want, and can that cohesion stay within the locker room? I think that's obviously a question, but I do think it's a good problem to have. You even want to call it a problem because you do have a number of different options. Obviously, if there were to be some injuries, some foul trouble, anything that might arise, you can kind of push some different buttons, and obviously there's a bevy of good options on this roster.
I'm curious about the front court situation because you hit on it a little bit there, but I was fascinated to see Dane Danger play 9 minutes against Kansas. When you look at it on paper, I know it's a lot. There's a lot of different reasons for it, but you look at it on paper, you got a really big physical front court. You've got an All-American caliber big man. You'd think that's a game where you're going to rely a lot on Dane Danger and his bigger body in the game for you. He plays 9 minutes. We've seen a lot of different combinations there. We saw in the Ottawa game, they kind of spaced it out around Ty, played Luke or Damask, whoever you want to consider the 4 in that lineup, but they played both those wings with Coleman at the 5. We've seen Quincy get in there, play next to Coleman. We know that Dane started a lot of games last year and Coleman slid down to the 4 to play next to him. And you got Hansberry in the mix as well. How do you see that situation kind of playing itself out? Because the Dane Danger usage early, I know it was just an exhibition game, but that was very significant to me. And I think that Coleman has kind of settled into that 5-man spot here. How do you think the front court's going to play itself out? Do you think it's going to be really matchup based and fluid, or do you think there is going to become a point where, hey, maybe Dane doesn't play as much as we think and he does really lean into Coleman at the 5 spot?
Yeah, I think primarily Coleman at the 5 is what this team really wants to ride with. And I think it's the best pairing with Ty. I think there is a question of Dane's ability to play with Ty in the same lineup because of the floor spacing, and you want to be able to open up that lane for Ty to drive. And I think it's obviously beyond Ty. Like when Coleman's playing the 5 and he's able to play that pick and pop, that high post, that leaves a lot of space in the lane, not only for Ty but for Terrence, for Marcus Damas. He uses cutting. I think that opens up a lot. Now that's not to to say. I think there's going to be some spots, and knowing how Dane's performed against some of these low major, mid major type of teams, don't be surprised if, hey, we watch Monday night and Dane's got 15 to 20 against the Eastern. Like that wouldn't be a surprise. Like that's something that he's obviously capable of. And that's not to say he's just going to, feast on the cupcakes either. I mean, he's had some moments as he did last year in the Big Ten of being able to be a reliable, throw it into him on the block and be able to get offense. I think there's going to be some opportunities for that. I think when you look at the Kansas game in particular, defensively, obviously Brad, he spoke to it in the post game, like there was a difference in Illinois' ability to guard ball screens when Coleman was the 5 versus when Dane was out there. There are times where Dane he's got to play a different style of defense. He's got to play in the drop coverage. And last year, he kind of later in the year got caught and kind of playing no man's land. And he's got to be able to move his feet and get good positions, help, and then recover to his man. And when Hunter got a couple of lobs off that pick and roll, then obviously Brad wanted to put Coleman back in there because Coleman's got more ability to cover and have range with it. So I think that Dane's minutes will be fluid based on matchup. I think that for the most part, I think that Quincy at the 4 is going to be something that is going to be established, especially if he continues to produce. But you got a lot of options. Like you can play Goody and Damas together. I think we're going to see some of that. I think we're going to see Amani probably not get a ton of opportunities early unless you're in some cushy spots in terms of games you're leading by a lot. But does he have the ability to push some guys? Like, yeah, I think he does. I think as he develops, and if Illinois gets in foul trouble, they know that he's going to go out there and rebound, going to play hard. So we'll see how that goes going forward. But yes, I think bottom line, Coleman at the 5 is something that I think is going to be established as the way that Illinois primarily wants to play. I don't think Coleman's going to play a ton at the 4 personally, just based on kind of how I'm viewing it with Dane and Coleman out there in terms of their pairing together. If Coleman shoots the 3 better, then that does allow that to be a little bit more of a compatible matchup. But I think that I'm not writing Dane off. I'm not saying he's not going to impact this team, but I do think there will be situations, especially when you're going to face maybe it was the fact that Dickinson's 7'1" and Dane at 6'9", 6'10", he can't contest on the inside maybe quite as well. But I think offensively, just the spacing they want, kind of the 5-out look, the playmaking they need out of different guys. I think that bodes well with Coleman at the 5 primarily.
All right, Derek, we head into the regular season now. Illinois' got a pretty loaded non-conference schedule. You got 3 top 10 opponents, at least in the preseason AP poll. You got that game at Rutgers to kick off conference play. You got the bragging rights game, as always. Finally get to see this team and some games that count. What are some of the main things you're going to be looking for here, especially as Illinois faces some of these higher-level teams? And what's going to be the key for this team? Obviously, a veteran team that Brad has said multiple times he thinks that there's going to be a lot of steadiness with this group. Do you think that can play out early on as you get some of these high-level opponents in non-conference play?
They're going to need it because they're going to get challenged. Marquette's going to come in about a week, and that's a really good team. Tyler Kolek's one of the best point guards out there in the country. Marquette was one of the hottest teams going into the NCAA tournament, the last squad to knock off UConn when you look at last year's season. So that's going to be a big challenge. And unfortunately, that Kansas win doesn't count on your resume, but obviously Marquette could, and that would be a nice quad 1 win to be a builder towards what you're going to look at in the NCAA tournament. You go into December, then it's really loaded. Rutgers on the road, like on paper, Rutgers doesn't look that great. You lose Cam Spencer, you lose McConnell, you lose Mulcahy. I still have a lot of respect for Steve Peichel and the teams that he's been able to build. Like those are tough, hard-nosed, good defensive type of teams, and that's a good environment. And obviously, Cliff Morey's a really good big man. But I think on paper, Illinois should be able to go in there and get that win. FAU, Final Four team, bring back everybody. I think it's going to be a good test, particularly in the backcourt. You look at, Elijah Davis or John L. Davis and those guys, Elijah Martin that they got there in that backcourt for FAU. And that's going to be a good test along with Tennessee, who we saw, if you're paying attention to the charity exhibition game against MSU. I mean, that's a really good defensive team. They get Dalton Connect, impact transfer, who obviously went nuts in that game. So that will be a tough test. But I think in terms of what I'm looking for, like just continue to have that cohesion and flow offensively. Right now, we don't have a ton to go off of, but the early indications, I think ball movement, player movement within a half court offense has been pretty encouraging. I think for the most part, this team is sharing the ball well. There have been some key highlight plays of you look at the Kansas game where they, all five guys touch the ball in one possession. Damask enters it into the post, it skips to the opposite corner, it swings all the way around for a three. Like those are plays that Illinois just wasn't making last year. It seemed like they try to run one action, and all of a sudden things would break down, and they ended up taking an ISO step back shot. Like there was a lot of those type of plays last year. Can they have this continued flow within their offense and look like a team that, even though they're going to play guys that as a unit haven't played a ton together, that is a benefit though of playing in Spain, of having older guys, obviously having the Kansas exhibition under your belt. So does that translate over into some big spots as you go through this non-conference slate? I think also closing time stretches. I think it would not be surprising to anybody if it's playing Marquette and you get the under 4 timeout and it's within a possession or two. Same thing FAU, same thing Tennessee. You'd hope to be in that spot on the road. Obviously at Tennessee, how does this team execute? Where do they go to? What's their identity late in games? Who's getting the ball? What are their kind of go-to plays? And without, let's say it stays the same and Ty's not out there. Not that even if Ty was, he's an inexperienced guy in terms of being on the ball. How effective can their offense be? I think defensively, they should be pretty good. I think you've got enough in terms of individual pieces, good team defenders, rebounding wise, they should be in a good spot to compete on the glass, just kind of with their veteran statuses and physical bodies and being able to hit the glass. So a lot of my focus is offensively, just how well they're ready to be effective and run things and get good looks and everything. Look, threes aren't probably going to fall. If they do, like they did against Kansas, then hey, this team's going to be making some real noise. But maybe that's another thing too, is like on nights when Terrence doesn't hit 5 threes or Coleman doesn't hit 4, how well does this team still score it? So I think those are things that I'll be looking for in this first part of the schedule.
All right, Derek, before we let you go, I'd like to get one last preseason Big Ten prediction, maybe a March Madness seed prediction. Do you think we stay on that preseason Big Ten top 3 with Purdue and Michigan State? Do you think we finally break the Sweet 16 drought? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
We're putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
If you're not picking a Sweet 16, everyone's going to riot. Just keep in mind.
Oh, boy. Kyle, because we talked a lot about this on the radio. You and I both like Maryland quite a bit. And I know that for our Illini Inquirer submission to The Athletic for the preseason poll, we had Maryland 3rd behind Michigan State and Purdue, and Illinois 4th. I do think Illinois is going to be in the mix. I think they're going to be in that top echelon. I think they're going to be a more consistent team this year. I'm not going to predict a Big Ten title or anything, but I think they're going to be challengers. I think they're going to be somebody that makes a legit run. And I think that Kansas performance, at least based on what we can go on right now, shows that maybe Illinois should be taken a little bit more seriously as a Big Ten title contender. I like Illinois' chances to get to the second weekend. I'm not going to guarantee it. Don't put me on the record and have old takes exposed, pull this up if Illinois gets a bounce in the first round or anything. But I think that veteran teams obviously do well in March. Yes, I know that a counter there would be, hey, good guard play, point guard play especially is something that usually tends to lead towards extended runs. No one doesn't have that in terms of a point guard, but I think just the depth, the amount of veterans on this team, the fact that Terrence has been in this program now, it's going to be his second year. I think he's going to know a little bit more in terms of how to fit in, where to pick his spots, and how to lead this team. I think Coleman being a 4-year guy, I really like Damask. I think Damask is a really nice addition. I think that Harmon and Guerrier fitting in. I think this team has if they were in the 4 or 5 seed line, and obviously you're going to have to beat a like team if that were the case. If you're a 4 playing a 5 or vice versa in that second round, you never know how that's going to go. But I just like what I've seen so far. I'm a fan of this team, and I do think that they have a decent chance to get the Sweet 16. And obviously, we all know Illini fans need that so badly.
We really do need it. Please. Derek, thanks a lot. We really appreciate your time here. Great stuff. And best of luck to you. What year is this for you on the beat now?
Man, you're dating me, Kyle. Man, I've been on this beat probably since you guys were in middle school, if not longer than that. So, I started probably, I think it was 2014. I went through a lot of the John Gross years. I've seen a lot of seasons without NCAA tournaments. So I like the fact that we're on a nice little run of me having somewhere to go in mid-March, and obviously expecting the same thing there. But I'm obviously excited to join you guys. Thanks for having me on, and maybe we'll catch up again later in the season.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you back. Best of luck to you. Hopefully it's a successful year of covering this team, a fun year of basketball. We really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.
Good stuff there with Derek Piper. Appreciate having him on. That was some great insight here as we continue to preview this season. But man, by the time this podcast goes live Monday, November 6th, it is game day. College basketball is officially back. Illinois tipping off at the State Farm Center, 7 o'clock against Eastern Illinois. This first week, we'll be back here next week previewing a big-time matchup against Marquette coming into Champaign. But this first week, you got two bye games. You got Eastern Illinois. You've got Oakland. It'll be interesting to see this team in games that count. We mentioned it in the last segment with Derek with the rotations. Are we going to see similar things and just continuing to see this point guard situation play out, see who they run things through. If there was a big thing that you're looking for here in these first two bye games, we're probably not going to learn a lot. Illinois should win these games handily, but if there was a couple things you wanted to pinpoint, couple things that you'll be eyeing as Illinois takes on Eastern Illinois and Oakland this week, what would they be?
Yeah, we keep talking about it. It's been kind of the focal point of our last two podcasts. And Derek talked about it too. It's point guard play. It's who's going to run the offense, whether it's Ty Rodgers, whether it's maybe a freshman, DGL, Moretti, maybe Terrence is running point. We saw Domask running it for some extended period of time versus Kansas. I just want to see how they're running the offense, maybe like assist to turnover ratio. Does it look fluid? I really just don't want to see pretty much exactly what we saw last season. Derek mentioned it. You mentioned it last podcast. It was brutal to watch. It was just taking up the whole shot clock. One guy chucking a three. It wasn't pretty at all. So I'd like to see that. I'm going to be focusing on that for sure. Obviously, it's a bit lesser competition. It's going to be a big focal point versus Marquette next week. And then besides that, I would say, how does the three-point shooting look? Free throw shooting probably won't be huge the first two games, but when you look at a game like Marquette, could come down to the wire. We could have maybe free throw shooting being a huge factor in that game. So I'd like to see that improved upon, and I want to see some consistent three-point shooting because we did not really see that last year.
Yeah, the three-point shooting thing I'm going to be watching for sure because we even saw it against Ottawa. They take like 42 threes. Now they made 10 or 11 of them. I mean, they made a double digits. They took a ton of them, percentages in the 20s. You have a good shooting night, shoot 41% against Kansas, but yeah, Terrence Shannon goes 5 for 9. Coleman Hawkins goes 4 for 9 from three. We've seen those guys play college basketball for 4 years and 5 years, and they're really streaky. And that's not something, they just haven't been that consistent where you can rely upon that every single game. So can this team survive if those guys aren't red hot from three? I'm sure they're not both going to be shooting 5 of 9, 4 for 9 in both these games, even against lesser competition. Maybe they won't take as many because they won't be stopped inside. But I'm curious to see, do we see Luke Goody catch fire a little bit? He struggled in that Kansas game, was a nice spark in the Ottawa exhibition, made a couple threes early. Can Domask be consistent from beyond the arc? Can Quincy hit some open shots? Can Justin Harmon hit some open shots? The three-point shooting I'm definitely going to be looking for because I'm not taking the 41% against Kansas as gospel saying we fixed this thing because that was your two star players playing great. And that you don't want to overlook that, but you're just not going to get that type of hot shooting from those two guys every night. Can you still shoot a capable percentage when those guys aren't shooting the way that they did in that game? Can you get some complementary pieces to make some open shots? And then I'm curious to see if they run more through Ty Rodgers here and just get him more experience on ball because we just haven't seen it in the preseason. And maybe that's really kind of what the entire plan is. I mean, Derek went through it. I mean, they've run things through a lot of different guys, and Coleman's a big part of that as well. And they're going to continue to run things through him, whether that's through the top of the key in the high post, and trust him with the ball. But I want to see against Eastern Illinois, against Oakland, I want to see Ty Rodgers in some ball screens and see how he performs in those. And I want to see him. Obviously, you're not going to be in a situation where it's late in the game and hopefully, I don't want to jinx anything, but hopefully it's not 2 minutes left and you're up 2 against Eastern Illinois or Oakland. And the free throw concerns come back into play, like you said. Hopefully that's not something we're discussing in these games. So you can leave him on the court a little bit longer and really just give him some reps on ball and see what he's made of in that. Because we've seen that a couple of times, but really it has been they've run a lot of things through a lot of different guys, and it hasn't really been the focus hasn't been put on him as that lead ball handler much. So I want to see a little bit more of that. I'm curious if they will do that. And yeah, the depth is going to come into play more. I mean, for heading into a game like Marquette in the third game of the year, a week from Tuesday, we saw Brad really shorten the rotation against Kansas. Maybe these 2 games are an opportunity for some of these guys on the bench to prove themselves and to come out hot and to earn minutes in those higher level games. Dane Danger has an opportunity. I mean, we saw last year he dominated those lower level teams. I mean, he looked great. These teams should not match up with Dane Danger down low. He should have good games in both of these games and really try to earn more minutes than he got against Kansas. Sincere Harris has an opportunity to come out and play well and earn some more time. Luke Goody can bounce back from that Kansas game. The freshmen, especially, if they can really flash like they did towards the end of the Ottawa game, then that just makes it all the more difficult for Brad and maybe gets him out on the floor some more. So I'm curious to see in 2 games that count and how all these pieces look. Do we continue to be encouraged by the offense, like you mentioned? Is it still fluid? Does this team still look connected in games that count? And some of those other questions, the shooting, the point guard spot, will continue to play themselves out.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there about sort of the depth. Get these guys going. These are 2 bye games, 2 tune-up games getting into the Marquette game next Tuesday. I really want to see these guys like Sincere, Dane, Luke Goody. We're going to need Luke Goody's 3-point shooting against Marquette. That's probably going to be a pretty high-scoring game. Going to need Sincere maybe to come in and stop Tyler Kolek for a couple possessions. You might need Dane in the low post against Marquette. They've got some solid front court pieces. So I just like to see as much as possible. It's easier said than done, but get these guys going, get the rotation looking decent, get the depth, get these guys motivated, energized, and feeling good about themselves going into these bigger games down the stretch.
Yeah, and Brad is going to be free to try some different lineup combinations, and we saw that. I think in the exhibition game against Kansas, I mean, both coaches treated it like a real game. I think in his mind, he wanted to get a feel for what a real game, like let's say the Marquette game is right now, this is how I would play things. If a guy doesn't have it, I'm going to pull him. I'm going to trust my veterans. In these 2 games, assuming that you can get out to an early lead, assuming that you can comfortably be in front of these teams in the second half, it's a great opportunity to, in games that count and in games that you still need to have urgency for, just try some different things. And like you said, and like we talked about, just get some different guys going and let guys play through mistakes a little bit more than you would if you were in a high-level battle with Marquette. Before we get out of here, let's hit some predictions here. Season kicks off tonight, and let's give some predictions here for this season. This is a team that I think there's some fairly wide-ranging opinions. I've seen some people super high taking that Kansas game and saying this is a Final Four caliber team, and I've seen people with some rightful concerns as well. I'm curious where you stand on that, and let's just kind of go through. Regular season record, 31 games, 11 non-conference games, 20 conference games. Where do you think this team falls? Big Ten race? Do you think this team competes for a Big Ten title? Where do you think they fall? And is this the year that Illinois breaks their 17-year Sweet 16 drought? Actually, it'd be 18 years by the time we get to March.
Yeah, that Sweet 16 drought is pretty much as old as us, it's worrying. I don't like seeing that.
Yeah, I was 1 year old when they made the Sweet 16 with that 05 team. And had you been born yet?
I was like 5 or 6 months old. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. There you go.
All right. In terms of the schedule, I don't know about making predictions for these Marquette, Tennessee, FAU. I like the 1 and 2. I think we could push to 2 and 1 based on that Kansas game. I don't want to get too hyped up based off that Kansas game, but we'll see. It's going to be fun to watch. In terms of the Big Ten, I would say I predicted us third. I think that puts us at maybe 14-6, 15-5, right in that area. Probably a game or two behind Purdue and Michigan State, who I have ahead of us. So I'm probably going to go 15-5, maybe 8-2 at home, 7-3 on the road. I think we defend the home court pretty well. I think we'll most likely drop two to Purdue. It's They're dominant. Zach Edey's probably the best player in the country. It's going to be really tough to beat them at Mackey and at home, of course. I do think we split with MSU. We play them twice. And I'm going to make a sort of a weird prediction. I think we win on the road and they beat us at home. That's just my weird prediction of the day. And then I think we drop a couple more games, potentially Maryland, potentially Ohio State, maybe Wisconsin. I don't think we're going to drop a game to one of those lower teams in the Big Ten. I think we have in years past, like teams like Rutgers maybe, who beat us at the rack. I think we take care of Rutgers at the rack this year. And like I said, I'm thinking 15-5, third in the Big Ten. I don't really want to make a Big Ten tournament prediction. That's too far away.
Yeah.
But then in terms of March Madness seed, Derek mentioned that 4 or 5 line. I think that's reasonable. I think third in the Big Ten puts you right around that range. Depending on how we do in the non-con, you got 3 or 4 pretty high-quality teams you're playing. Maybe pick up a win there, move up to the 3 line. Who knows? Maybe you drop to 5 or 6. And I really want to break the Sweet 16 drought, so I'm going to say we win at least 2 games in March. And yeah, that's my prediction.
You going Final Four, or are you just going to stop at Sweet 16? Are we on the Final Four bandwagon?
I'm not going to get too greedy. No, I'm not going Final Four. I don't even want to push Elite Eight either.
Yeah, well, yeah. Just get us a second weekend, and we'll progress forward from there. That's all we need. Yeah, I mean, I'd love for everything you said there to come true. I'm probably a little more cautious with my prediction than you are. I think in the non-conference, to me, you break the 11 games down. You got 6 games you should absolutely take care of, or you got 7 games that you absolutely should take care of, 4 games that are going to be tough tasks, and that's Marquette, Florida Atlantic, Tennessee, Missouri, 4 high major opponents. I think they go 2-2 in those games, and I'd be fine with that. If you told me I could sign up for 2-2 in those 4, however they may fall, I'd be all right with that. I think that gets you 2 resume wins, and I just think college basketball, you get a game at home here, you get 2 games at neutral, 1 game on the road. I don't know exactly how they're going to play out. I think Illinois should have a chance to win every game. I'm cautiously optimistic about the game against Florida Atlantic. I'm kind of pessimistic about Tennessee, but just overall, I think you go 2-2 in those 4, and that leaves you at 9-2 in the non-conference. Big Ten wise, I had them 4th last week. I think the Big Ten, there's some quality here from about 1 through about 10 or 11 to me, and I just think. To me, I think that the champion, whether that's Purdue or Michigan State, we both picked Purdue, I think it's going to fall right in line with last year. Purdue went 15-5 and won the league. So I think Illinois in 4th place. I have them at 13-7 in the conference, which, again, I think I'd take that absolutely. I think they're capable of more. But with a pretty tough conference schedule, you got Purdue twice, you got Michigan State twice. I believe you have Wisconsin twice. You only have 1 against Minnesota and 1 against Penn State, if I'm not mistaken. So it's pretty tough draw in the conference slate. I think 13-7 is kind of the sweet spot for me. I think they're pretty good at home. I'm kind of with you. 8-2 at home. I think you should be able to defend your home court there. And then, you just go 500 on the road in conference play. 5-5 gets you to 13-7, gets you in that top 4 mix. And that's kind of how I see things. So I got them at 22-9, 13-7 in the conference, a notch below the top. I think Purdue wins it. Illinois hangs around in that race, but I have them 4th, as I mentioned last week. And then, you get to the tournament. I think my prediction probably puts them around the 5-6 line. It's probably not enough to get to a 4. Maybe it is. Never know. I probably have them 5-6 in terms of seeding. And yeah, part of it is absolutely the bias in me and the fact that I want it to happen. But I do think that you can rely on experience in March. And I think what we've seen the last couple of years with the draws that Illinois has gotten, it's about time that they get a favorable draw. It's about time that they match up really well with 2 teams and win 2 games in the tournament. They're due. And I just think it happens this year. I'm with you. I'm not going Final Four yet. Maybe talk to me in a month and a half after they play Marquette, Florida Atlantic, Tennessee, Rutgers. Maybe I'll change my mind. I don't quite think that they're that good. I don't think they're Final Four good, at least yet. They haven't proven that yet. I have too many questions to go that far, but I do think they win 2 in a row in the tournament. It's just time. It's just time. I think you got to get some draw luck this time. I think the experience is going to be important. And I think it's time. And if you're a 5-6 seed, you should win your first round game and you should be in pretty much a toss up with your second round game. And I just think it's time that they get a favorable matchup in that round of 32, finally break through. So I'm with you. Sweet 16, you probably have a few less losses in the regular season. But overall, I think we're both pretty optimistic. I think this is going to be a pretty good basketball team.
Yeah, for sure. One more thing, I think we're also due to beat Missouri. I know we beat them, I think 2 years back. But Brad Underwood just cannot beat Missouri. I think it's the year. They've got a solid roster. They've got some really good transfers, actually. But, I mean, we're still better. We're just due.
Yeah, it's going to be experience versus experience. They've got a ton of older guys. I know they brought in some transfers, like you said, some older fifth-year transfers as well. So come on. Please beat Missouri, man. To me, with the non-conference, I can't have even if, let's say, Illinois enters that game at whatever it would be, even if they're 10-1 entering that game and Missouri's 7-3 or where they're off to us, it's the damn bragging rights game. It's just, you throw the records out and it seems like Illinois always comes out flat in that game, at least the last couple of years. I mean, they had that nice run. Actually, ironically, under John Gross, they had a run where they won 5 in a row against Missouri. And then they had the game 2 years ago on the Big Ten title team where Kofi and Co blew them out by 30. Other than that, I think Brad's lost every time to them. Maybe his first year when both teams were horrendous, he won. Trent Frazier's freshman year. But I think he's 2-5 or 2. He's entering year 7, so he'd be 2-4. But it's time to beat Missouri, man. And it's time to make it. Let's just knock out all the demons this year. Beat Missouri. Get off to a fast start. Make a Sweet 16. Whatever else there is, beat Purdue for the first time in forever. Whoever else, we haven't beaten Maryland in forever. Yeah. Beat Maryland, we haven't won at the rack in forever. Go do that. Let's knock all these things out this year. Let's do that.
Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it indeed. That'll wrap it up for us. We got some basketball to watch coming up here. We will see you again next weekend to actually break down some games that counts. And that should be exciting. And, of course, we'll have the Marquette game coming up a week from now that we'll preview 100%. Spend a lot of time on next week's show. But for now, once again, the plugs for us. Go follow at Champagne on Ice on Twitter. We'll be doing some live tweeting during games. We'll be asking for some reactions. We're getting everybody involved here. We love to read comments here on the show. So make sure to go follow at Champagne on Ice on Twitter. Subscribe here, Field of 68 Podcast Network on YouTube. Give us a rating, review on all the podcast platforms. Again, still working on Spotify. Apologize for all you Spotify podcast listeners because we are having some difficulties with that, working on that right now. But we are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Megaphone, Google Podcasts. So anywhere you get it, feel free to drop us a rating there. For now, Kyle Tausk, Mike Farmer, we're going to go watch some hoops, and we'll see you again next week. Any last thoughts?
That's it. I can't wait for the season. Go Illini.
College Hoops is back. Fired up about it. Have a great week, everybody.